Hey, City Center Baptist Church family, it's Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters. Digging Deeper question number 5 this week asks, why do you think Paul did not directly quote Scripture when he shared the gospel with the Athenians in Acts 17? Why did he quote their own pagan writers? What is your takeaway from his strategy? There is a marked difference between Peter's approach to sharing the gospel in Acts chapter 2 with Paul's approach in Acts 17. Peter's Pentecost sermon is full of scripture as he sought to convince his hearers that Jesus was the Lord who they must believe. Paul, on the other hand, did not directly quote any biblical text. Did he not believe in the authority or effectiveness of the Old Testament scriptures? Was he afraid to offend the learned Athenians? Not at all. He was actually doing something strategic. He was contextualizing his message and adapting his approach to his audience. In fact, both Peter and Paul were being purposeful. They knew their respective audiences and adapted their messages to gain a hearing for the gospel. Paul provides a useful model for us as we seek to engage our postmodern skeptical world today. Peter knew who he was addressing on the day of Pentecost. It was an overwhelmingly Jewish audience gathered from around the Mediterranean world to worship in Jerusalem. The greatest source of authority for these Jewish pilgrims and proselytes to Judaism would be the Old Testament scriptures. So Peter repeatedly referenced them to build his case and present Jesus as the sovereign Lord and promised Messiah of Israel. This crowd knew the scriptures. They respected the scriptures, and they could be persuaded using the scriptures. And that's precisely what happened. Approximately 3,000 people trusted Christ and joined the early disciples. Conversely, Paul had a very different audience. Athens was a completely pagan Gentile city, world-renowned for its philosophers and orators. The Hebrew scriptures were not authoritative to this intellectual crowd. In fact, they were probably unknown to the Athenians, who would not have cared about any sacred writings from a backwater place such as Israel. For Paul to gain a hearing, he would have to approach them from a completely different direction than Peter. So Paul argued from what the Athenians knew to move them towards the God they didn't know. He affirmed their interest in religion by noting their many idols, but he had observed one altar to an unknown God. He skillfully leveraged this to propel his discussion forward to the one true God who had revealed himself in nature and in humanity. He even employed a Greek poet, Aratus, to appeal to them. Paul looked for some common ground based on the principle that all truth is God's truth. A true statement from one of their own helped him bridge to the gospel. Every idea Paul shared in his Athenian address was rooted in Scripture. He just didn't tell them his source by quoting chapter and verse. In this tactful manner, he presented the truth of the gospel in such a way as to gain open ears to Christ. Paul's strategy can be utilized today in our pagan postmodern world. Look for truth from sources deemed authoritative by our culture. Be observant for potential bridges that may open up dialogues with unbelievers. Be winsome in order to win some to Jesus. And expect a response. Paul was mocked by many when he spoke of Christ's resurrection, but a few found Christ and provided the basis for a faith community in that godless city. Perhaps God will do the same through us as we learn to strategically contextualize the gospel in our day. This has been Pastor Brad coming to you from DDQ headquarters.